When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Punchline. User, Static PM2. Posted, May 2nd, 1997.
The drive home tonight was darker than usual. It's still like that now, the shadows outside my windows thicker than I've ever seen them, as though someone has turned up the world's black level to obscure its seams. It has an emptiness to it as well, a sense that everything is further apart than it should be. There are gaps you feel rather than see. I'd like to think it's all in my head, the world as filtered through a late night and my seasonal affective disorder. Believe it or not, this would be a comforting thought, because the alternative would be admitting that Jay was right. Jay, Maldonado, and being right are not terms you typically expect to find in the same sentence. His talk show Area 51 runs from 1 to 3 a.m. on Y100 in Philly, and a good way to describe him is, what if Art Bell had a fraction of the audience, all of whom were insane? That's not to say Jay himself is crazy. I consider him a friend of mine who, most of the time, is razor sharp with a recall that's almost frightening. It's just that he knows what his audience wants, a direct line to the other side. The other side of what? I couldn't tell you. That's Jay's department, not mine. We met at the station a few years ago, totally by chance. Getting on as a producer at Y100 was a godsend because my place in Elwyn is only a 5-minute drive away from their studio in media, as opposed to the hour-long back-and-forth commute I'd been doing into Philly. I can be a bit of an insomniac, so when I bumped into Jay, who'd come into the station for a meeting, I was familiar with his show. Apart from the radio, there's not a whole lot going on in Elwyn for the vampire set. As with a lot of DJs, Jay's bombastic on-air personality, where he rants about UFO conspiracies and monsters hiding in back alleys, wasn't at all how he was in person, and we hit it off. Ever since, when I can't sleep, I'll drive into work and hang out with him during breaks. He was in fine form tonight. I like to say there are levels to Jay. Level 1 isn't quite phoning it in, because he's not capable of doing that, but it's Jay at simmer. He might let callers determine the direction of the show or ask if one of them is a member of the robot Illuminati, but won't press him on it by administering an off-the-cuff Voight-Kampff test. If you're not up on your sci-fi, that's the one from Blade Runner, which is supposed to help police identify replicants. That's level 3 stuff. Level 2 Jay is him taking control of the show by its lapels and driving every conversation towards what he happens to have been reading about lately. You want to talk about the UFO you saw, but Jay's just finished a book about corruption in the dairy industry. Boy, you're going to be talking about the effect of ET on cows. Level 3 Jay is what we got tonight. So intense and fast-paced, it can seem like he's channeling more than he's speaking extemporaneously. He did take time to administer a void conf test to one flustered listener, Larry, who couldn't figure out the right answer to "You were on Alpha Centauri." You see a woodchuck chucking wood, his tiny shoulders are tired. How much does he chuck, Larry, and why aren't you helping him? In fairness to Larry, I don't think there was a right answer, aside from hanging up the phone, so maybe he did get it right in the end. When the gap between calls got long enough, Jay had to start spitballing, and so he launched into a long spiel about trash in the streets. He hates mess, and I've seen him lose his shit at someone for spitting gum on the sidewalk. It's honestly a miracle no one has shot him, either for the content of his show or moments like that. This is when he hit escape velocity, that place where you could be forgiven for thinking he's tapping into something outside himself. Y100 Studio is visible from the street. I can always tell when I'm coming to visit during a hot streak, my friend's face red, gesticulating wildly in the direction of the microphone. In those moments, he is so much a singular presence, unlike anyone else I've ever met, and I'm in awe of him. Sometimes, like tonight, I'm afraid of him too. What started as raging against people who litter grew into a polemic about the way we take care of the planet. It's a simple question, he shouted into the microphone. Do we want to be grown-ups and look after this wonder we've been given to live on, or are we going to be like pathetic, overgrown children, stumbling over things, breaking them until mom and dad swat us on the behind? Because it's coming, folks. It's happening already. I know you listen to this show. You want me to tell you that all your problems are the result of alien mind control, or the government conspiring against you, or demonic interference. Well, guess what? They're not. Those things are real, you bet your bottom dollar, but they're not what's oppressing you. What's oppressing you is you. Your laziness, your self-indulgence, your refusal to grow up and live in reality. I know you don't want to hear that, and I don't want to have to tell you that, believe me. We, as a species, keep making the easy choice. Damn the consequences. After all, grown-ups don't get swats on the behind unless they pay good money for it, right? Wrong. You know what was here long before you, me, and Klaatu made 3. The land, and the spirits of the earth who tended it. According to the old legends, man grew strong enough to drive those spirits underground into a place called Tirnanog, which made us think we were a real big deal. Oh boy, were we proud of ourselves over that one. For thousands of years, we've lorded over the land, thinking it meant we were its final authority. We were very wrong. The people of the earth, what some call the Fae, or the She, or the Shubin, or any one of 100 other names all over the world, weren't defeated by us. They retreated to give us ground, an opportunity for us to mature out of our brash, conflict-driven adolescence into an adulthood where we understood the land as a common ground for all of us to share. Except that never happened, did it, folks? No sirree, Bob. We thought we ruled the roost, and whoa, beside anyone who dared attempt to stop us from souring the waters in the air. The problem, friends and neighbors, is that the bill has come due. You think I'm talking about global warming. We won't be here long enough for that to finish us off, because the courts are changing. Not the Supreme Courts, oh no. No, I mean the court underground. The fairy courts. You see, The world beneath us is ruled by two councils, the Seelie and the Unseelie. It's said that for countless generations, the Seelie have held sway, and while they don't like us very much, they see our potential, hoping to mold us into what we could be. Well, we see where that got us, and so do the Fae. All the seers and psychics and sensitives I know are telling me, Jay, a change is underway. The Seelie are ceding control to the Unseelie. They're gonna right the ship. And you know what, listeners? I believe they're right. Can't you feel it? Forget the weird weather, the tornadoes and fires. Look outside right now. Dark, isn't it? Darker than it should be. The streetlights do more to highlight the blackness than dispel it. That's not your eyes playing tricks on you, sports fans. Not a signal to update your prescription. That's the Unseelie moving back in, mobilizing the first step of their plan to undo the damage we've done. I won't pretend to know the details of what they're going to do, but I can guarantee you that the final step will be on our throats. And unless we mend our ways quickly, we'll deserve it. He glanced across the studio to where I was sitting and started as if he'd forgotten I was there. We're gonna take a break now for news at the top of the hour. We'll be back shortly. With a sigh, he muted his mic and leaned back from the console, looking up at the ceiling. Jesus, Jay, I said, that was intense. What's the punchline? He rubbed his eyes, then took a sip of the coffee next to him. Look outside, Chris. Can't you see it? We're the punchline, and I think the joke is almost over.
Subject, Ghost Site. User, AltGunny36. Posted, June 1st, 1998.
In the early morning hours of September 19th, 1980, a Titan II nuclear missile exploded in its silo several miles north of Damascus, Arkansas. The facility's 740-ton launch duct closure door was launched 200 feet up and some 600 feet away to the northeast. Countless tons of debris were blown into the surrounding countryside, scattering across 400 acres. One man, Senior Airman David Livingston, lost his life, and 21 others were injured, some seriously. Everything that could have gone wrong during what came to be known as the Damascus incident did, except for one. Built-in safety features on the Titan II's warhead worked as intended, preventing any release of radioactive material, and it was found intact 100 feet away from the facility's entry gate. That series warhead, the W-53, was, at the time, the most powerful in America's nuclear arsenal, and had it exploded, would have burned or outright vaporized the thousands of military personnel at the blast site before spreading nuclear fallout to roughly 1/4 of the continental United States. It would have been an unparalleled disaster, and the fact it didn't happen is one half miracle and one half object lesson in the importance of safety regulations. But there is another story behind the accident at Site 374-7. Even before Airman David Powell dropped a 9-pound socket during routine maintenance, accidentally puncturing the missile's Stage 1 fuel tank, that exact re-entry vehicle and warhead, serial number 620006, were the focal point for another disaster. Odds are good You haven't heard of this one, even though it claimed 53 lives at another site in Arkansas, known as 373-4. You haven't heard of it because it doesn't fit. Allow me to explain. Human beings love to tell stories. It's part of the spark which animates us. Stories allow us to shape and define our world, giving it meaning. We see the stars and group them into rough shapes, which we then give names and personalities, conferring order on what might otherwise seem like vast, unmanageable chaos. Over time, we've come to expect our stories to have a certain arc, composed of interchangeable elements which have a near limitless number of configurations. Each society has its own opinions on which of those interchangeable elements are permissible within their narratives. Ours has decided that true stories must not have elements of the fantastic, whether it be ghosts or vampires or tiny little winged fairies who carry a grudge. These must be relegated to the realms of fiction or be mocked mercilessly until they are withdrawn or the teller discredited. What happened during the incident at Site 373-4, known within the Department of Defense as the Ghost Site, and how it connects to what happened outside Damascus, is one such story. It was August 9th, 1965. The silo at the facility outside Searcy, Arkansas, was in the middle of an upgrade meant to help it withstand a nuclear attack. Remember that this was the height of the Cold War, only 3 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the threat of nuclear annihilation was a constant companion to every single living thing on the planet. A crew of 55 men bustled in and out of the massive concrete structure, improving blast doors, upgrading hydraulics, and installing emergency lights. All of them at least knew the baseline reputation of 373-4, that some crew members said it felt pretty odd once you descended into the depths of the bunker. The lights would turn themselves on and off for no apparent reason, or how hand-operated pumps would begin to operate independently. Then there was the story of the elevator, a manually operated cage traveling between levels 2 and 8. If the previous occupants had left the door open and another crew member needed to use it, they would ring a bell to alert the person up or downstairs. The bell was not electronic. It could not be opened remotely. One night, crew member Rodney Holder was in the silo with a coworker, and the pair had forgotten to close the elevator door behind them. The bell rang. Holder instinctually began walking toward the elevator, then stopped short. He and the other man with him were supposed to be the only people in the silo that night. Who'd be calling for an elevator? Holder radioed the control center to find out who else had been dispatched there and why, only to learn no one had been sent anywhere. They were alone in the building, or at least should have been. Again, the upgrade crew working at 373-4 that day probably would have been aware of these stories even if they didn't give them much thought. There was, after all, a job to be done, and whoever thinks of ghosts in the warm light of a summer's day? At approximately 1 p.m, after the men had returned to the silo following their lunch break, warning sirens blared as a fire was detected. Over the PA system, Captain David A. Young gave the order to evacuate, but it was too late. Black smoke choked the bunker's concrete hallways, making escape all but impossible. Only 2 men of the 55 on site found their way outside, suffering second and third-degree burns in the process. Miraculously, firefighters managed to extinguish the blaze before the missile's fuel tanks could be compromised. An Air Force Accident Investigation Board later concluded that the fire had been the result of human error, beginning on Level 2, caused by a welder who must have mistakenly turned his tools on a temporary hydraulics line. The gouting fluid, they reasoned, must have hit the electric welder's arc, causing the fire. This was a satisfactory explanation for everyone except for 17-year-old Gary Lay, one of the 2 survivors. According to Lay, no one had been welding up on Level 2 that day. No one at all. So, if there had been no humans present to cause this human error, what had? The Air Force has declined to offer any further explanation. The story doesn't end there. If it did, we might be able to dismiss it as exactly what the Air Force says it was: human error and a failure of memory on the part of young Gary Lay. However, after the mass death at the ghost site, its Titan II missile was removed for evaluation to ensure it was still intact. Once its integrity had been verified, the missile, complete with a W-53 warhead, serial number 62006, was sent to another silo, which also happened to be in Arkansas, 374-7, just outside Damascus. 1 warhead, 2 catastrophes, and a raft of unexplained questions, the answers to which we may never fully understand, because just like the story of the ghost site, I suspect they won't fit what we've been told to believe.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.